The autumn air carried the scent of rain-soaked earth through the open window of Hartwell Manor, though Lady Elise Hartwell barely noticed as she sat in the dim corner of the drawing-room, her embroidery hoop resting untouched in her lap. From where she positioned herself, always in the shadows, always apart, she could observe without being observed, a skill she had perfected over 23 years of existence. The voices of her mother and younger sister drifted across the room like birdsong, bright and insistent, discussing the upcoming ball at the Ashford estate with the kind of fevered excitement that Elise had long ago learned did not extend to her. The emerald silk, definitely the emerald, Lady Leonora declared, her voice carrying that particular quality of certainty that came so naturally to beautiful women accustomed to being heard. "It makes my eyes absolutely luminous, don't you think, Mama?" Their mother, the Countess of Hartwell, responded with the devoted enthusiasm she reserved exclusively for her youngest daughter. "Darling, you could wear sackcloth and still outshine every woman in London. But yes, the emerald will be perfect. I've heard the Duke of Thornbury will be in attendance." Elise's needle paused mid-stitch. The Duke of Thornbury. Even she, sequestered as she was from society's inner circles, had heard the whispers about Edmund Blackwood, the formidable duke who had returned to England after years abroad, managing his family's considerable holdings. He was wealthy beyond measure, handsome according to reports and notably unmarried, a combination that had set every ambitious mama in London into a frenzy of matchmaking calculations. "The Duke won't be able to take his eyes off you," the Countess continued, her tone dripping with satisfaction. "No man could." Leonora's laugh was like crystal chiming. "Well, I certainly won't discourage his attentions. A duchess's coronet would suit me beautifully." Elise bent her head lower over her embroidery, the familiar ache settling in her chest like an old friend. She had become expert at making herself small, at dimming whatever light she possessed so as not to compete with her sister's blazing brilliance. It was easier this way, she had learned. Safer. To want nothing meant disappointment could not find her, but the Duke of Thornbury. The name stirred something in her she thought long buried, a flutter of curiosity, perhaps even longing, quickly suppressed. Men like that did not notice women like her. They noticed Leonora, with her golden curls and perfect features, her effortless charm and practiced coquetry. They noticed the ones who sparkled and demanded attention, not the ones who faded into wallpaper. "Elise," her mother's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. "You're coming to the ball, I presume?" It was not truly a question. Elise raised her eyes to find both her mother and sister regarding her with expressions she knew too well. The Countess with vague impatience, Leonora with barely concealed contempt. "Of course, Mama," Elise replied quietly. "Do try to make yourself presentable," the Countess said with a sigh. "I know it's a hopeless endeavour, but one must keep up appearances. Perhaps the grey silk. It's suitably modest and won't draw attention." "Which is exactly where she belongs," Leonora added sweetly, though her eyes held no warmth. "In the background where no one need notice her." The words stung, as they always did, but Elise had learned not to flinch. She simply nodded and returned to her needlework, listening as her mother and sister resumed their animated planning. This was her role in the family, the forgotten daughter, the unfortunate elder sister whose presence was tolerated but never celebrated, mentioned in society only as an afterthought, if at all. The evening of the Ashford ball arrived with unseasonable warmth, the sky unusually clear for October. Elise dressed in the grey silk as instructed, the colour washing out her already pale complexion. She studied herself in the mirror briefly before turning away. There was no point in lingering over reflections that would only confirm what she already knew. She was plain where Leonora was beautiful, unremarkable where her sister was extraordinary. The ballroom at Ashford House blazed with candlelight, hundreds of flames reflecting off gilded mirrors and crystal chandeliers. Music swelled as Elise entered with her family, though she immediately noticed how the crowd parted naturally for Leonora, how eyes turned and conversations paused to admire her sister's beauty. The emerald silk had indeed been the perfect choice, turning Leonora into a vision of grace and allure. Elise drifted to the periphery of the room, finding her usual position along the wall where chaperones and wallflowers congregated. From here she could watch the spectacle of society at play without having to participate in it. She observed the elaborate dances, the flirtations conducted behind fans, the careful negotiations of status and alliance that characterized every London season. It was during her third dance of observation, she never actually danced, of course, that she noticed him. The Duke of Thornbury stood near the entrance, and even without introduction, Elise knew him immediately. He possessed that particular quality of presence that marked men of genuine power, the kind that came not from titles alone, but from character, forged through trial. He was taller than most men in the room, his features strong rather than classically handsome, his dark hair slightly longer than fashion dictated, but it was his eyes that arrested her, intelligent, assessing, missing nothing. She watched as her mother practically dragged Leonora toward him, the Countess's smile predatory in its calculation. The introduction was made, and Elise saw her sister deploy her full arsenal of charm, the perfectly timed laugh, the demure lowering of lashes, the subtle touches on his arm that suggested intimacy while maintaining propriety. Other young ladies hovered nearby like moths to flame, each hoping for the Duke's notice. Elise turned away. She had seen this performance countless times. The Duke would be captivated like all the others, would dance with Leonora, perhaps call on her tomorrow. The familiar pattern would unfold as it always did, with her sister at the center and Elise invisible at the edges. She slipped through the crowd toward the terrace doors, needing air, needing escape from the suffocating reminder of her own inadequacy. The night was blessedly cool after the heated ballroom, and she found herself alone among the shadows of the garden. A full moon hung low in the sky, its light painting everything silver and strange. Elise walked to the stone balustrade and gripped it, closing her eyes against the sudden rush of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. How long could she endure this half-life? How many more balls would she attend as a ghost? How many more mornings would she wake knowing the day held nothing for her but more of the same endless, empty routine? "I wish," she whispered to the moonlight, the words escaping before she could stop them. "I wish someone would see me, not Leonora's sister, not the unfortunate elder daughter, just me." It was foolish, this speaking to the moon like a child making wishes on stars. But something in the night's beauty, in the solitude and silver light, loosened the careful control she always maintained. She let herself want, just for a moment, let herself imagine a life where she mattered to someone, where she was chosen, valued, loved. A reasonable wish, I think. Elise's eyes flew open and she spun around, her heart hammering. The Duke of Thornbury stood several feet away, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. Heat flooded her cheeks as mortification crashed over her. He had heard. He had heard her pathetic whisper to the night, her desperate plea for the impossible. "Your Grace," she managed, dropping into a curtsy that she hoped hid her burning face. "I apologize. I didn't realize. I should return inside." "Please don't." His voice was deeper than she expected, with an edge of something she couldn't quite identify. "I came out here to escape the noise as well. The ballroom is rather overwhelming." Elise stood frozen, uncertain. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to remove herself before he could pity her or worse, report her odd behavior to the other guests. But he made no move to leave, simply walked to stand beside her at the balustrade, his gaze turning skyward. "The moon is particularly beautiful tonight," he observed. "My mother used to say that moonlight reveals truths that sunlight obscures. I never understood what she meant until I was older." Despite herself, Elise found her curiosity stirred. What did she mean? He turned to look at her then, really look at her, and Elise felt the full weight of his attention like a physical thing. Those intelligent eyes studied her face with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. She had the strange sensation of being truly seen for the first time in her life. She meant that daylight shows us what people want us to see, the performance, the facade. But moonlight strips away pretense. It reveals essence. He paused. "What I heard just now, that was essence, wasn't it? Unguarded truth." Elise wanted to deny it, to laugh it off as foolishness, but something in his tone prevented her. He wasn't mocking or pitying. He was simply listening. seeing. It was nothing, Your Grace. A moment of weakness. Was it weakness to desire recognition? To want to be seen as yourself rather than in relation to others? He shook his head slowly. That seems like a very human wish to me, perhaps the most fundamental one. Tears pricked at Elise's eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She would not cry in front of this man, would not add to her humiliation, but her throat felt tight with the effort of suppressing the emotion his words had unlocked. "You're Lady Elise Hartwell," he said after a moment, and it was not a question. Lady Leonora's elder sister. There it was, the inevitable comparison, the reduction to her sister's shadow. Elise nodded, unable to speak. "I noticed you earlier," he continued, and she looked up in surprise. "In the ballroom. You were standing along the wall, observing everything with the most extraordinary focus. You see things, don't you? Really see them. Most people look but don't truly observe. You notice." Elise's breath caught. No one had ever commented on this before, her habit of watching and noting the small details that others missed. She had thought herself invisible, but he had seen her, actually seen her. Yes, she admitted softly. "I suppose I do." A rare gift. He turned to face her fully. "I've spent the last hour being introduced to every eligible young lady in London, each one determined to captivate me with rehearsed charm and calculated conversation. It's exhausting, frankly, like being surrounded by beautiful automatons all performing the same dance. My sister is very beautiful," Elise said automatically, the defense ingrained after years of practice. "She is," the Duke agreed readily, "but beauty without substance is merely decoration. Pretty to look at, but ultimately forgettable." The words were so unexpected, so contrary to everything Elise had been taught to believe, that she could only stare at him. He smiled then, and it transformed his face from severe to something warmer, more approachable. "I apologize if I'm being too direct. I spent several years in India managing trade routes, and I'm afraid I lost some of the polite circumlocution that London society demands. I prefer plain speaking." "I think I prefer it too," Elise heard herself say, and was rewarded with another smile. They talked then, really talked, in a way Elise had never experienced with a man. The Duke asked her opinions on things, books she had read, her observations about society, her thoughts on matters of substance rather than the superficial pleasantries that usually constituted ballroom conversation. He listened when she spoke, his attention never wavering, asking follow-up questions that demonstrated genuine interest rather than polite tolerance. Time seemed to suspend itself in that moonlit garden. Elise forgot to be self-conscious, forgot to make herself small and unobtrusive. She simply was, and remarkably, astonishingly, that seemed to be enough. More than enough, if the Duke's focused attention was any indication. "I should return inside," she said finally, though she was reluctant to break the spell. "I've been gone too long. My mother will notice." "Will she?" The Duke's tone held a hint of skepticism that suggested he understood more about her family dynamics than she had revealed. Elise felt her face heat again. Perhaps not, but still, propriety demands. "Of course," he offered his arm. "Allow me to escort you back." She hesitated only a moment before placing her hand on his sleeve, acutely aware of the strength beneath the fine fabric of his coat. They walked in companionable silence back toward the blazing lights of the ballroom, and Elise felt herself transforming back into the invisible woman she had always been, the magical interlude in the garden already feeling like a dream. But at the threshold the Duke paused. "Lady Elise," he said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Your wish to the moonlight. I heard it, and I see you." Then he was gone, melting into the crowd before she could respond, leaving her standing frozen as the implications of his words slowly penetrated. He saw her. He had said it, plainly, unequivocally. The Duke of Thornbury, the man every woman in London wanted, had looked past the performance of society's brightest stars and seen her, plain, unremarkable Elise. She found her mother and sister near the refreshment table, Leonora holding court among a cluster of admirers, while the Countess preened visibly beside her. Neither noticed Elise's return, too absorbed in Leonora's triumph. "The Duke danced with me twice," Leonora was saying, her voice carrying that smug satisfaction Elise knew so well. "Twice." Everyone noticed. Lady Ashford commented that we made a striking pair. But as Elise stood there listening to her sister's self-congratulation, she felt something shift inside her. The Duke had danced with Leonora, yes, probably fulfilling some social obligation, but he had talked with Elise, had seen her, had listened to her thoughts as though they mattered. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to feel the small, dangerous flutter of hope. The days following the ball brought an unexpected development that set Hartwell Manor into a state of controlled chaos. The Duke of Thornbury sent flowers, not to Leonora, as everyone expected, but to Elise. A modest arrangement of white roses and lavender arrived with a simple card that read only, "For the lady who sees clearly. T." The Countess's face had gone through several alarming colour changes upon reading the card, while Leonora's expression shifted from confusion to fury in the span of seconds. Elise herself could hardly believe it, staring at the flowers as though they might vanish if she blinked. "There must be some mistake," the Countess declared finally. "He obviously meant them for Leonora." "The card says, 'The lady who sees clearly,'" Elise pointed out quietly, her heart beating too fast. "That was something we discussed. He meant them for me." "Don't be absurd." Leonora snatched the card from her hand. "He danced with me twice." "Twice? Why would he send you flowers?" Elise didn't answer, but she carefully took the card back and tucked it into her pocket, a small act of defiance that felt momentous. The flowers were hers. Whatever his reasons, the Duke had chosen to acknowledge her, and she would not surrender that. More flowers came the next day, and the day after that. Each arrangement was thoughtful rather than ostentatious, accompanied by cards that referenced their conversation in the garden. One quoted a passage from a book she had mentioned enjoying. Another contained a pressed flower from India with a note explaining its significance. Each gesture was personal, specific, impossible to dismiss as generic courtship. The Countess's displeasure grew with each delivery, while Leonora's rage simmered dangerously beneath a veneer of brittle composure. But Elise, for the first time she could remember, felt something other than resignation. She felt the terrifying, exhilarating possibility of change. When the Duke's formal request to call arrived, addressed specifically to Elise, the Countess could no longer pretend the flowers had been misdirected. She received him in the drawing room with icy civility, Leonora beside her radiating wounded pride, while Elise sat stiffly on the settee, hands clasped tightly in her lap. The Duke's demeanour was impeccable, his manners beyond reproach as he made polite conversation with the Countess about neutral topics. But his eyes kept finding Elise, and each time their gazes met, she felt that same jolt of connection she had experienced in the moonlit garden. "Lady Elise," he said after the required pleasantries had been exhausted, "I wonder if you would do me the honour of taking a turn about the garden, with your mother's permission, of course." The Countess could hardly refuse without causing a scene, though her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. Leonora looked ready to explode, her hands fisting in her skirts, but Elise rose with as much grace as she could muster and accepted the Duke's offered arm. The garden at Hartwell Manor was modest compared to other estates, but Elise had always loved it. She had spent countless hours here, finding solace among the roses and lavender, the stone paths and hidden benches where she could escape her family's coldness. "Your sister is displeased," the Duke observed once they were out of earshot of the house. "My sister is accustomed to receiving all male attention," Elise replied, surprising herself with her honesty. "Your interest in me is unexpected." "Why?" He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Why is it unexpected that I would seek the company of an intelligent, observant woman rather than a beautiful but vapid one?" "Because that's not how the world works, Your Grace. Beautiful women like my sister are chosen. Women like me are overlooked." "Then perhaps the world has been choosing poorly." His tone was firm. "I didn't return to England to select a wife based on the same shallow criteria that governs every other aristocratic marriage. I want a partner, Lady Elise. Someone I can talk to, whose mind I respect, whose company I genuinely enjoy. All the physical beauty in the world cannot compensate for dull conversation and empty-headed prattle. Elise felt heat rise in her cheeks again, but this time it wasn't from embarrassment. It was from something else entirely, a dangerous, forbidden hope that this might be real, that this remarkable man might truly see value in her. I'm not accustomed to this," she admitted. "To being noticed, to mattering." "I know." His expression softened. "That's part of what drew me to you. You haven't spent years crafting a false persona to attract suitors. You're genuine, real. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" They walked for another hour, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his time abroad, the cultures he had encountered, the business ventures he was managing. She shared her observations about society, her thoughts on literature and politics, subjects she had never dared discuss with anyone. Sure, her opinions would be dismissed or mocked. With him, she felt safe expressing herself fully. When they returned to the house, the Countess's expression was glacial, but the Duke seemed utterly unbothered. He took his leave with perfect courtesy, but not before making his intentions clear. "I will call again tomorrow, Lady Elise, if that would be agreeable to you." "It would be very agreeable, Your Grace." The next weeks passed in a blur of calls, drives in the park, carefully chaperoned visits that nonetheless felt intimate and precious. The Duke, Edmund, as he had asked her to call him in private, was courting her, actually courting her. Every delivery of flowers, every conversation, every meaningful glance reinforced the impossible reality. But while Elise was discovering happiness for the first time, her family was descending into fury. Leonora's jealousy had evolved into something darker, more dangerous. She made cutting remarks at every opportunity, each one designed to wound, to remind Elise of her place. "He'll tire of you eventually," Leonora hissed one afternoon when they were briefly alone. "Once he realizes how plain and boring you really are, he'll remember that he could have had me. And I'll make sure everyone knows you were nothing but a temporary diversion." The word stung, but they couldn't quite penetrate the happiness Elise had found. For the first time in her life, she mattered to someone. Edmund saw her, truly saw her, and chose her anyway. That knowledge was armor against her sister's venom. The Countess took a different approach, attempting to manipulate the situation to Leonora's advantage. She threw parties and invited the Duke, seating Leonora beside him, engineering situations designed to showcase her younger daughter's beauty and charm. But Edmond simply excused himself politely and sought out Elise, his preference unmistakable to anyone watching. Society began to take notice. Whispers followed Elise through ballrooms, disbelieving, scandalized, fascinated. The Duke of Thornbury, eligible beyond measure, was courting the elder Hartwell sister. The plain one, the invisible one. It defied every rule of social hierarchy and desirability. Some of the talk was cruel. Elise heard the speculation that Edmund must be eccentric or unwell to prefer her over Leonora. Others suggested she must have trapped him somehow, used some feminine wile to bewitch him. The gossip hurt, but Edmund's steady presence helped her endure it. "Let them talk," he told her one afternoon as they sat in Hartwell's garden, his hand covering hers on the bench between them. "Their opinions mean nothing to me. Only yours matters." "They think you're mad," Elise said softly, "choosing me over someone like Leonora." "Then I embrace madness gladly." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that made her breath catch. "Elise, I want to make my intentions formally known. I want to ask your father for permission to court you with the aim of marriage." Marriage. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and promise. Elise's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Are you certain?" she whispered. "There will be talk, so much talk. Your family." "My family will be pleased that I'm finally settling down. As for talk, let society say what it will. I've never particularly cared for their approval, and I don't intend to start now." His grip on her hand tightened. "But I need to know, do you want this? Do you want me?" Did she want him? This man who had seen her when everyone else looked through her, who valued her mind and her observations, who made her feel like she mattered. The question was almost laughable in its obviousness. "Yes," Elise breathed. "Yes, I want this. I want you." His smile transformed his face, making him almost boyish despite his commanding presence. "Then I will speak to your father tomorrow." The Earl of Hartwell, perpetually distracted by his own pursuits and largely uninterested in his daughter's affairs, gave his permission with little fanfare. The Countess could not object without appearing unreasonable, though her displeasure was palpable. Leonora's reaction was far more dramatic. She took to her rooms for 3 days, claiming illness, though everyone knew it was rage and wounded pride. The engagement was announced formally, and London society erupted in scandal and speculation. How had plain Lady Elise captured the Duke? What did he see in her? Surely it was a mistake, a temporary madness that would pass. But as the weeks wore on and wedding preparations began, society had to accept the impossible. The Duke genuinely wanted her. For Elise, these weeks felt like living in a beautiful dream from which she might wake at any moment. Edmund was attentive, thoughtful, steadfast. He introduced her to his friends and family, all of whom received her warmly once they saw how happy she made him. He took her to his estate in Thornbury, showed her the home that would soon be hers, asked her opinions on renovations and decor as though her thoughts mattered, because to him they did. That was the revelation that still left her breathless. To Edmund, she mattered. She was not an afterthought or a disappointment. She was chosen, valued, wanted. But beneath the joy, a current of tension built. Leonora had emerged from her self-imposed isolation changed, harder, colder, more calculating. She watched Elise with eyes that promised retribution, and Elise knew instinctively that her sister would not simply accept defeat. Leonora had spent her entire life as the center of attention, the desired one, the beautiful daughter everyone preferred. Having that taken away by her overlooked elder sister was an insult she would not forgive. The confrontation came the night before the wedding. Elise was in her room, surrounded by packing trunks and wedding preparations, when Leonora entered without knocking. Her sister's beauty was still breathtaking, but something ugly lurked behind her perfect features. "Enjoy your triumph while it lasts," Leonora said, her voice dripping with venom. "Because I promise you, sister dear, this will not end well. He'll see what you really are eventually, a dull, plain woman with nothing to offer. And when he does, everyone will know that you never deserved him." Elise met her sister's gaze steadily. A year ago, these words would have destroyed her, would have confirmed every terrible thing she believed about herself. But Edmond had changed her. He had shown her that she did deserve to be seen, to be valued, to be loved. "You're wrong, Leonora," Elise said quietly. "He sees exactly what I am, and that's why he chose me. Not despite my plainness, but because what I offer is worth more than a pretty face. I'm sorry that's so difficult for you to understand." Leonora's hand shot out, gripping Elise's arm painfully. "You stole what should have been mine." "No." Elise pulled free. "I accepted what was freely offered to me. Edmund was never yours to steal. He made his choice, and nothing you say or do will change that." Her sister stared at her for a long moment, something like respect flickering briefly behind the anger. Then she turned and left without another word, leaving Elise shaking but victorious. The next morning, Elise became the Duchess of Thornbury in a ceremony that was both grand and intimate. She wore ivory silk and carried white roses, the same flowers Edmund had first sent her. As she walked down the aisle, she saw him waiting for her, and the look on his face made her forget the whispers, forget the stares, forget everything except the overwhelming reality that this was happening. He had chosen her, and she had chosen him, and they were beginning something real together. When he took her hand at the altar, his grip was firm and sure. When he said his vows, his voice carried conviction that silenced any doubters. And when he kissed her after they were pronounced husband and wife, Elise felt the final walls around her heart crumble. She was seen, she was chosen, she was loved. But even as joy overwhelmed her, she caught sight of Leonora in the crowd, her sister's face a mask of cold fury. The battle might have been won, but the war, Elise suspected, was far from over. Thornbury Hall stood magnificent in the golden light of late afternoon, its Palladian architecture commanding respect from the surrounding countryside. As the carriage bearing the new Duke and Duchess of Thornbury approached the estate, Elise felt her breath catch. This was home now, hers, impossible as it still seemed. The staff had gathered in formal ranks to greet them, and as Edmund helped her down from the carriage, she saw genuine warmth in many faces rather than the skepticism she had braced herself for. "Welcome home, Your Grace," Mrs. Pemberton, the housekeeper, said with a deep curtsy. The older woman's eyes crinkled with what looked like genuine pleasure, and Elise felt some of her tension ease. The first weeks of married life unfolded with an ease that surprised her. Edmund was an attentive husband, patient with her nervousness, generous with his time and attention. He included her in estate business, asking her opinion on matters ranging from tenant disputes to crop rotation, treating her insights as valuable rather than dismissing them as he might have. More remarkably, he seemed to genuinely enjoy her company, seeking her out throughout the day, not from duty, but from desire. They established rhythms and routines that felt natural. Mornings were spent on estate business, Edmund teaching Elise the intricacies of managing such a large property, introducing her to tenants and staff, walking the grounds together, discussing improvements. Afternoons she often spent in the library, which Edmund had immediately told her to consider her own domain. He had even ordered several books she had mentioned wanting to read, placing them prominently on the shelves as a surprise. Evenings were for conversation, for the kind of deep-ranging discussions that Elise had never imagined sharing with anyone. Edmund's mind was sharp and curious, and he pushed her to articulate her thoughts more fully, to defend her positions, to consider perspectives she hadn't encountered. They debated philosophy and politics, discussed literature and art, argued cheerfully over everything from agricultural policy to the merits of Gothic architecture. One evening, perhaps 6 weeks into their marriage, they sat in the library after dinner, a fire crackling in the hearth. Rain lashed against the windows, creating a cocoon of warmth and intimacy. Edmund had been reading estate reports while Elise worked on correspondence, but she felt his attention shift to her. "What are you thinking?" he asked, setting aside his papers. "I was thinking," Elise said slowly, meeting his gaze, "that I never knew life could feel like this. That I could feel like this." "Like what?" "Happy." The word felt almost dangerous to speak aloud, as though naming it might cause it to vanish. Valued. Seen. Edmund rose from his chair and came to sit beside her on the settee, taking her hand in his. His thumb traced circles on her palm, the simple touch sending warmth through her. "You deserve all of that and more," he said firmly. "I hate that your family made you believe otherwise. That they convinced you that you weren't enough when the truth is that you're—" He paused, searching for words. "You're extraordinary, Elise. You always have been. They simply lacked the perception to see it." She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder, feeling safe in a way she never had before. "Sometimes I still can't quite believe this is real, that you chose me. I'll spend every day proving it to you if that's what it takes." He kissed the top of her head, his arms coming around her. "You're my choice, Elise, always." But their peaceful isolation couldn't last forever. The London season would begin soon, and as the new Duchess of Thornbury, Elise would be expected to take her place in society. The prospect filled her with dread. She had been invisible as Lady Elise Hartwell. As a duchess, she would be highly visible, subject to intense scrutiny and gossip. Society had been scandalized by her unexpected rise. Now they would be watching for any sign that the Duke had made a mistake. "You don't have to face them alone," Edmund assured her when she voiced these fears. "I'll be beside you, and anyone who dares to treat you with disrespect will answer to me." His fierce protectiveness made her smile despite her anxiety. "You can't threaten all of London's society." "Watch me," he said, not entirely joking. Their return to London came in early spring, and with it the inevitable collision with Elise's family. The Countess had sent a stiff note requesting a meeting, which Edmund insisted they handle at Thornbury House, his London residence, rather than Hartwell Manor. The message was clear. Elise was no longer subject to her family's authority or judgment. When the Countess and Leonora arrived for tea, the tension was immediate and palpable. Leonora wore black as though in mourning, which Elise suspected was deliberate. Her sister's beauty remained as striking as ever, but there was a hardness to her features now, a bitterness that marred her perfection. "Your Grace," the Countess said to Edmund with exaggerated courtesy, ignoring Elise entirely. How kind of you to receive us. It's Duchess Thornbury's home as much as mine, Edmund replied smoothly, his hand finding Elise's in a gesture of solidarity. She is mistress here. The reminder of Elise's new status hung in the air. The Countess's smile became fixed, while Leonora's jaw clenched visibly. Tea was excruciating. The Countess made veiled comments about Elise's unexpected good fortune, while Leonora maintained an icy silence, punctuated by speaking glances that communicated her contempt more effectively than words. Through it all, Edmund remained steadfastly at Elise's side, his presence a bulwark against their subtle attacks. "We're hosting a ball at the end of the month," the Countess announced as the visit drew to a close, "to celebrate Leonora's engagement to Viscount Ashford." Elise blinked in surprise. She hadn't heard about any engagement. From Leonora's expression, equal parts triumphant and bitter, this was clearly a recent development, possibly arranged specifically to save face after the humiliation of losing the Duke to her plain elder sister. "Congratulations," Elise said quietly to Leonora, meaning it. Perhaps marriage would give her sister the security and attention she craved. Leonora's lip curled. The Viscount is everything a woman could want. Handsome, charming, devoted. Some of us don't need to settle for being chosen out of pity. The jab was clear, and Elise felt the familiar sting. But before she could respond, Edmund's voice cut through the room like a blade. "If you're suggesting I married your sister out of pity, Lady Leonora, you're gravely mistaken." His tone was polite but edged with steel. "I married her because she is the most remarkable woman I've ever met. Her intelligence, her insight, her genuine nature, these are qualities no amount of physical beauty can replicate. I chose her freely and gladly, and I would make the same choice every day for the rest of my life." The silence that followed was absolute. The Countess's face had gone pale, while Leonora looked as though she'd been slapped. Elise felt tears prick at her eyes, but these were tears of gratitude, of overwhelming emotion at being so publicly and unequivocally defended. "We should take our leave," the Countess said stiffly, rising. "Come, Leonora." After they departed, Elise turned to Edmund, her throat tight with emotion. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "No one speaks to my wife that way. Not her family, not society, not anyone. You are a duchess now, Elise, and that means something. It means respect, deference, consideration. But more than that, you're my wife, my partner, my choice, and I will defend that choice against anyone who questions it." The incident set the tone for their entrance into London society. Word spread quickly about the Duke's fierce defense of his wife, and it became clear that anyone who dared to treat the new Duchess with anything less than respect would face his considerable wrath. Society being what it was, most people chose the path of least resistance. They might gossip in private, but publicly they treated Elise with the courtesy her position demanded. But not everyone was so easily cowed. There remained pockets of resistance, women who had hoped to catch the Duke themselves and who resented Elise's unexpected triumph. Lady Blackwood, Edmund's cousin by marriage, was particularly venomous. She hosted a card party where she made several cutting remarks about country mice playing Duchess, loud enough for Elise to overhear, but quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability. Elise endured it, her face composed, even as humiliation burned through her. But later that night, in their bedroom at Thornbury House, the facade crumbled. "Maybe they're right," she whispered, as Edmund held her while she cried. "Maybe I'm not suited to this, to being a duchess, to being your wife." "Stop." He pulled back to look at her, his expression fierce. "You are exactly suited to being my wife. Lady Blackwood is bitter because she put her own daughter forward and I wasn't interested. These women attack you because they're jealous, not because you've done anything wrong. But I'm not like them. I don't know how to navigate these social intricacies, how to respond to their barbs with the same elegant cruelty." "Good." He wiped her tears with his thumbs. "I don't want you to become like them. I want you to remain exactly as you are. Honest, genuine, kind, even when others don't deserve it. Those qualities are what make you remarkable, Elise. Don't let anyone convince you to abandon them." She clung to his words, using them as armor as the season progressed. There were triumphs as well as trials. At a dinner hosted by the Duke of Devonshire, Elise found herself in conversation with several influential gentlemen about trade policy with the East India Company. Her insights, gleaned from discussions with Edmund and her own reading, impressed them enough that one later told Edmund his wife was remarkably well informed for a woman. The comment was patronizing, but Edmund had beamed with pride anyway, and Elise had felt the warm glow of accomplishment. She began to find allies as well. The Duchess of Marlborough, an older woman known for her sharp wit and political acumen, took Elise under her wing. "You remind me of myself when I was younger," she told Elise one afternoon over tea. "Too thoughtful for the shallow waters of society, but forced to swim in them regardless. You'll navigate it, my dear. You have substance, and substance always outlasts flash." Even Leonora's engagement ball, which Elise had dreaded, passed without major incident. Leonora was radiant on Viscount Ashford's arm, and the Viscount seemed genuinely taken with her. Perhaps, Elise thought hopefully, her sister would finally find the happiness she craved. Perhaps the rivalry and bitterness could finally end. But she should have known better. The trouble began with whispers, subtle at first. Someone had seen the Duke deep in conversation with a beautiful opera singer. Someone else had heard he kept a mistress in a house in Chelsea. Someone claimed to have witnessed him flirting outrageously with Lady Margaret Hamilton at the theatre. The rumours were vague, unsubstantiated, but persistent, exactly the kind of scandal that society loved to feast upon. Elise heard the whispers, saw the pitying looks cast her way. She tried to dismiss them, knowing Edmund's character, trusting in the strength of their marriage. But doubt was insidious, and after a lifetime of being told she wasn't enough, those old insecurities found fertile ground. One evening, after a particularly difficult ball where the rumours had been especially prevalent, she confronted him. "Are you happy?" she asked abruptly as they prepared for bed. "With me, with our marriage. Are you happy?" Edmund looked up sharply from removing his cufflinks, his expression shifting from surprise to concern. "Of course I am. Why would you ask that? There are rumours. About you and other women, about—" She couldn't continue, the words catching in her throat. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by anger, not at her, but at whoever had spread such poison. "Elise, listen to me. There is no opera singer, no mistress, no flirtation with Lady Margaret or anyone else. These are lies, manufactured by people who want to undermine our marriage. But why? Why would anyone—" "Because we're happy," he said simply. "Because I chose you over women they considered more suitable, and that choice threatened their understanding of how the world works. If plain Lady Elise can become a duchess and make her husband happy, it undermines everything they believe about beauty and worth and value. Your cousin, Lady Blackwood," Elise said slowly, pieces clicking into place. "She's been very vocal about her disapproval. She's also been very vocal in her interest in seeing me remarry her recently widowed sister," Edmund said grimly. "This has her fingerprints all over it. She thinks if she can damage your confidence, make you doubt me, it might weaken our bond." "And Leonora," Elise added, her stomach sinking. "She's been at several of the same events where these rumours started." The realization that her own sister might be working to destroy her marriage hurt more than she wanted to admit. But given Leonora's jealousy, given her parting words on Elise's wedding eve, it made terrible sense. "They're working together to break us," Edmund said, his jaw set. "But they won't succeed. I won't let them. We won't let them." He crossed to her and took her hands, his grip firm and grounding. "Elise, I need you to hear me. I love you. Not because I felt sorry for you, not because I was tired of society beauties, not because of any reason except that you are exactly who I want. You are my choice, my partner, my wife, and nothing, no rumor, no scheme, no social pressure will change that. I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling both terrifying and right. They hadn't spoken of love explicitly before, both being reserved by nature. But the emotion had been building for months, expressed through actions, if not words. Saying it aloud felt like sealing something, making it permanent and real. He kissed her then, deep and possessive. And in that kiss, Elise felt all her doubts dissolve. This was real. They were real. And they would face whatever came together. The next day, Edmund took action. He paid a very public and very cold call on Lady Blackwood, making it clear that he was aware of the rumour's source and would not tolerate any further attacks on his wife's character. He also sent word to his business associates and political allies that anyone who gave credence to the lies being spread would find themselves excluded from his favour. The message was clear: the Duke protected his own. When they attended the opera that evening, Edmund made a point of doting visibly on Elise, holding her hand, whispering in her ear, kissing her temple during intermission. The message was unmistakable. They were united, happy, and unshaken by gossip. In their box, Elise spotted Leonora across the theatre with Viscount Ashford. Her sister's expression was thunderous as she watched Edmund's attentiveness. The Viscount was speaking to her, clearly trying to reclaim her attention, but Leonora's focus remained fixed on Elise with an intensity that was almost frightening. "She won't give up," Elise murmured to Edmund. "Leonora, she's determined to prove I don't deserve you." "Then she'll be disappointed," Edmund replied, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "Because you do deserve me, and I deserve you, and that's all that matters." But as the opera progressed, Elise felt a growing sense of unease. She knew her sister, knew the depths of her jealousy and wounded pride. Leonora wouldn't simply accept defeat and move on. She would escalate. The question was when and how. The answer came with stunning swiftness. 2 weeks later, Edmund received an invitation to a diplomatic dinner being hosted by Lord Waverley, a powerful figure in government with whom Edmund had significant business interests. The dinner was ostensibly to discuss trade agreements, but it was really a test, a chance for influential figures to assess the new Duchess and determine whether she was a liability or an asset to her husband's position. "It's important," Edmund told Elise as they prepared. "Lord Waverley's support could mean the difference between securing those new shipping routes or losing them to competitors. But I need you to know, you're more important. If you're not comfortable attending, we won't go." "No," Elise said firmly. "This matters to you, which means it matters to me. I can do this." She dressed carefully for the evening, choosing a gown of deep blue silk that Edmund had said matched her eyes. Her maid arranged her hair in an elegant style, and as Elise studied herself in the mirror, she saw not the plain girl she had been, but the Duchess she had become. Edmund's love had changed her, given her confidence and grace she hadn't known she possessed. The dinner at Lord Waverley's townhouse was as formal and intimidating as she'd feared. The guest list read like a who's who of London's most influential figures: politicians, diplomats, wealthy merchants, and their sophisticated wives. Elise recognized several faces from previous social events, but many were new to her. What she hadn't expected was to see Leonora. Her sister stood near the fireplace in a gown of scarlet silk that complemented her golden beauty perfectly. Viscount Ashford was at her side, but Leonora's attention was fixed on Elise with an expression of cold triumph. At her elbow stood Lady Blackwood, and the two women exchanged a look that made Elise's blood run cold. "Edmund," she murmured, gripping his arm, "Leonora and Lady Blackwood are both here." He followed her gaze, and his expression hardened. "So they are. Together. How interesting." "It's a trap," Elise whispered. "They've planned something." "Then we'll face it together," Edmund replied firmly. "Remember, you're the Duchess of Thornbury. You outrank everyone in this room except Lord Waverley and his wife. Carry yourself accordingly." Dinner was announced, and guests moved toward the dining room. Elise's sense of dread grew as she saw the seating arrangement. She had been placed between Lord Waverley and a French diplomat, positions of honour that should have been flattering. But Leonora was directly across from her, positioned to observe and comment on every movement, every word. The dinner proceeded through its early courses without incident, though Elise remained tense, waiting for whatever blow Leonora and Lady Blackwood had planned. Conversation flowed around the table: politics, trade, society gossip. And Elise participated when addressed, grateful for all those discussions with Edmund that had prepared her for exactly this kind of intellectual sparring. It was during the fourth course that Leonora struck. "Your Grace," she said sweetly, her voice carrying down the table. "I've been meaning to ask, How are you finding life as a duchess? It must be quite overwhelming for someone from such modest circumstances." The words were carefully chosen, designed to remind everyone of Elise's origins as an overlooked country girl while maintaining plausible civility. Several conversations stilled as people turned to hear Elise's response. "I find it quite fulfilling, thank you," Elise replied calmly, "though I hardly consider Hartwell Manor modest circumstances, given our family's long-standing position in society." "Oh, I didn't mean the house," Leonora continued, her smile sharpening. "I meant the circumstances of your upbringing. After all, you spent so many years in obscurity. One wonders if you're truly prepared for the responsibilities of such an elevated position." "One might wonder the same about anyone," Lady Waverley interjected smoothly from the head of the table. The older woman's expression was unreadable, but her tone suggested disapproval of Leonora's approach. Marriage to a duke requires many adjustments regardless of one's background. But Leonora wasn't deterred. "Of course, though some adjust more easily than others. Tell me, Your Grace, has the Duke introduced you to his business associates yet? I understand there are some rather complex negotiations happening. Such matters must be quite beyond your understanding." Elise felt Edmund tense beside her, but she placed a hand on his arm, silently asking him to let her handle this. She had endured 23 years of Leonora's subtle cruelty. She knew her sister's tactics. "On the contrary," Elise said, her voice clear and steady, "I find the negotiations fascinating. In fact, just this morning the Duke and I were discussing the proposed modifications to the East India Company Charter and how they might affect shipping routes through the Cape. It's a complex issue involving multiple stakeholders with competing interests." She continued, outlining the key points of the negotiations with a thoroughness that demonstrated real understanding. Around the table, several men leaned forward with interest, including Lord Waverley himself. The French diplomat asked a clarifying question, and Elise answered it, then posed one of her own about French trade policy that demonstrated she had been paying attention to his earlier comments. As the conversation evolved into a genuine discussion of trade policy, Elise saw Leonora's expression shift from triumph to fury. Her sister had tried to embarrass her by suggesting she was too simple to understand her husband's business. And instead, Elise had proven herself not just competent, but genuinely informed. But Leonora wasn't finished. As dessert was served and conversation fragmented into smaller groups, her sister leaned forward. "It's remarkable, really," Leonora said, her voice pitched to carry to neighbouring guests, "how someone can transform themselves so thoroughly. Though I suppose when one is so desperate to justify a surprising match, one will go to great lengths to appear suitable." The implication was clear, that Elise was performing, pretending to be something she wasn't. Lady Blackwood, seated nearby, nodded in agreement. "One does wonder," Lady Blackwood added, "whether such studied behaviour can truly last. Eventually, one's true nature reveals itself." This was it, the coordinated attack they had planned. Both women working together to undermine Elise's credibility, to suggest she was a fraud playing at being Duchess. Around them, guests had gone quiet, sensing drama. Elise felt something shift inside her. These women, her own sister and Edmund's bitter cousin, were trying to destroy her. They were trying to make her feel small again, invisible again, worthless again. And she realized with stunning clarity that she was done allowing it. She set down her fork with deliberate care and met Leonora's gaze directly. "You're quite right, Leonora," she said calmly. "I have transformed. I was a woman who allowed her own family to convince her she had no value, who accepted invisibility as her due, who believed the lies that beauty was the only currency that mattered." She paused, letting the words settle. "But then I met someone who saw through those lies, who recognized that substance matters more than surface. And yes, I did change. I became the woman I always should have been, confident, valued, loved." She turned to address Lady Blackwood. "As for my true nature revealing itself, I certainly hope it does, because my true nature is someone who works hard, who cares deeply about the people dependent on our estates, who values learning and growth, who loves her husband with everything she has. If that's what you mean by true nature, then yes, I hope it reveals itself every single day." The silence around the table was absolute. Then Lord Waverley began to clap, slow, deliberate applause that others quickly joined. Lady Waverley smiled approvingly, and the French diplomat raised his glass in silent salute. "Well said, Your Grace," Lord Waverley declared. "Very well said indeed." Leonora's face had gone white with rage, while Lady Blackwood looked as though she'd been struck. Their plan had backfired spectacularly. Instead of humiliating Elise, they had given her the opportunity to demonstrate her grace under pressure, her eloquence, her strength. Edmund's hand found hers under the table, squeezing gently. She didn't need to look at him to know he was proud. The remainder of the dinner passed in a blur. Elysia engaged in conversation with genuine warmth, no longer performing but simply being herself, intelligent, thoughtful, engaged. By the time they took their leave, she had secured not just Lord Waverley's respect, but genuine invitations from several other guests who clearly saw her as an asset rather than a liability. In the carriage home, Edmund pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that made her forget everything else. "You were magnificent," he said against her lips. "Absolutely magnificent." "Did you see Leonora's face?" "I did," Elise admitted. "I almost felt sorry for her. She's so consumed by jealousy that she can't even enjoy her own engagement." "That's her choice," Edmund said firmly. "You tried to be gracious, tried to move past the rivalry. She's the one who keeps attacking. But tonight, she learned that you're not the frightened girl she used to bully. You're the Duchess of Thornbury, and you're formidable." The words settled into Elise's heart, taking root. She was formidable. She had stood up to her sister and her husband's enemies, and she had won. Not through cruelty or manipulation, but through honesty and strength. But the victory would prove short-lived. 2 days later, an invitation arrived that would force the final confrontation. The Duke of Thornbury requests the honor of your presence at a dinner to celebrate new trade agreements and diplomatic alliances. Edmund had planned this dinner weeks ago, before the tensions with Leonora and Lady Blackwood had escalated. It was meant to be a celebration, a showcase of his successful negotiations, but now it would become something else entirely, a battlefield where the simmering conflict would finally come to its inevitable conclusion. The guest list was extensive, including everyone who mattered in London society. And because protocol demanded it, Elise's family had been invited as well. The week leading up to the dinner passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Thornbury House blazed with activity, as servants cleaned and polished, as cooks planned elaborate menus, as Elise herself worked with Mrs. Pemberton to ensure every detail was perfect. This dinner mattered not just socially but politically. The alliances Edmund had forged could shape England's trade policy for years to come. But beneath the practical concerns, Elise felt the weight of impending confrontation. Leonora would be there. The Countess would be there. Lady Blackwood and her allies would be there. Every person who had doubted Elise, mocked her or worked to undermine her marriage would gather under her own roof. It was both terrifying and strangely appropriate. This final test would happen on her territory, in her home with her as hostess. "You don't have to invite them," Edmund told her the night before. "Your mother and sister. We could find a reason to exclude them." "No," Elise said firmly. "I spent my whole life hiding from Leonora, making myself small to avoid her cruelty. I won't hide in my own home. Let them come. Let them see what I've become." He studied her face for a long moment, then smiled. "When did you become so fierce?" "When someone showed me I was worth fighting for," she replied, reaching up to touch his cheek. "You did that, Edmund. You made me believe I deserved to take up space in the world." The day of the dinner dawned clear and cold, winter sunlight streaming through the windows of Thornbury House. Elise rose early, unable to sleep, and spent the morning checking and rechecking arrangements. Everything had to be perfect, not because she needed to prove anything to her critics, but because this dinner represented everything she and Edmund had built together. By evening, the house glowed with candlelight, every room reflecting the care and attention invested in it. Elise dressed in a gown of midnight blue velvet, her hair arranged in an elegant style that emphasized rather than hid her features. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw not the plain girl she had been, but the woman she had become, confident, composed, ready. Guests began arriving as dusk fell. Elise stood beside Edmund in the entrance hall, greeting each arrival with genuine warmth. She had learned the art of reading people, of sensing their intentions and responding accordingly. Some came with genuine goodwill, pleased to celebrate Edmund's success. Others came with curiosity, wanting to see how the unlikely Duchess was managing, and a few came with malice, hoping to witness her failure. Lord and Lady Waverley arrived early, and Lady Waverley squeezed Elise's hand warmly. "A beautiful home, Your Grace. You've done wonders with it." "Thank you, my lady. Your support has meant a great deal to me." "Nonsense. You've earned every bit of respect you've gained. Some of us simply recognize quality when we see it." The words bolstered Elise's confidence as more guests arrived. The French diplomat she'd impressed at the previous dinner greeted her like an old friend. Several of Edmund's business associates complimented the arrangements. Even Lady Margaret Hamilton, who had been mentioned in those early malicious rumors, approached Elise with an apologetic smile. "Your Grace, I wanted to tell you directly. Those rumors about the Duke and myself were utterly false. I was used as a pawn in someone's scheme, and I deeply regret any distress it caused you." "Thank you for telling me," Elise replied sincerely. "I never believed them, but I appreciate your honesty." When the Earl and Countess of Hartwell arrived with Leonora and Viscount Ashford, the temperature in the entrance hall seemed to drop several degrees. The Countess's greeting was stiff, her eyes taking in the grandeur of Thornbury House with what looked like bitter envy. The Earl, as always, seemed distracted and uninterested, but it was Leonora who captured Elise's attention. Her sister wore a gown of pale gold that showcased her beauty perfectly, her golden hair arranged in elaborate curls. She looked like a princess from a fairy tale. Yet there was something brittle in her perfection, a hardness around her eyes that beauty couldn't quite mask. "Sister," Leonora said, the word dripping with false sweetness, "what a lovely home you have. So grand. One might almost forget your humble origins." Before Elise could respond, Edmund's voice cut through the tension. "Lady Leonora, how kind of you to celebrate our success." The emphasis on "our" was subtle but unmistakable. Elise was his partner in all things, including triumph. Viscount Ashford, clearly uncomfortable with the undercurrents, steered Leonora away toward the drawing room. The Countess followed, her expression glacial. As they departed, Lady Blackwood arrived with her widowed sister, and the two women exchanged meaningful glances with Leonora as they passed. "The alliance is still active," Edmund murmured to Elise. "They're planning something." "Let them plan," Elise replied, with more confidence than she felt. "We're ready." When all the guests had arrived, they moved into the dining room, a magnificent space that could accommodate 40 people comfortably. The table gleamed with crystal and silver, elaborate floral arrangements perfuming the air. Elise had spent hours on the seating arrangement, carefully considering personalities and alliances, ensuring conversation would flow naturally while avoiding combinations that might create awkwardness. She had placed Leonora far down the table, between an elderly earl who was slightly deaf and a younger gentleman more interested in discussing horses than engaging in social intrigue. It was a deliberate choice. Leonora would be unable to dominate conversation or launch attacks from that position. The Countess sat near the middle, flanked by gentlemen who would demand her attention. Lady Blackwood was positioned where she could be easily observed but not easily heard. As hostess, Elise took her place near Edmund at the head of the table, with Lord Waverley to her right and the French diplomat to her left, positions of honor that reflected her status and the respect she had earned. The first courses passed smoothly. Conversation flowed naturally, touching on politics, trade, the upcoming season, recent scandals. Elise participated when appropriate, listened attentively, ensured glasses were refilled and courses served seamlessly. She was in her element, not performing the role of Duchess, but simply being one, comfortable in her own authority. From down the table, she could see Leonora growing increasingly frustrated. Her sister's attempts to draw attention to herself were thwarted by her dinner companion's lack of interest in the kind of flirtatious banter she specialized in. The elderly Earl kept mishearing her and launching into long stories about his youth, while the horse-obsessed gentleman wanted only to discuss bloodlines and racing prospects. It was during the main course that the attack finally came, though not from the direction Elise expected. Lady Blackwood rose from her seat, drawing all eyes to her. She held a wine-glass, her expression carefully composed into something approximating warmth, though her eyes remained cold. "If I might have everyone's attention," she announced, "I'd like to propose a toast." The room quieted, conversations pausing as guests turned toward her. Edmund's hand found Elise's under the table, squeezing warningly. This was not part of the planned program, and Lady Blackwood's presumption in hijacking the dinner was a deliberate insult. "To the Duke and Duchess of Thornbury," Lady Blackwood continued, her smile brittle, "and to the rather unexpected path that brought them together. We all know the story, of course, how the Duke in his infinite kindness chose to look past obvious obstacles to make a most surprising match." The words hung in the air, seemingly complimentary but laced with venom. The implication was clear. Edmund had lowered himself, had made a choice based on pity or perversity rather than genuine preference. Before anyone could respond, Leonora stood as well, her face flushed with wine and emotion. "Yes, quite unexpected," Leonora added, her voice carrying an edge that made several guests shift uncomfortably. "I mean, we all thought, that is, everyone assumed, well, it's just rather amusing, isn't it? The plain sister becoming a duchess while the beautiful one—" She trailed off, seeming to realize she'd said too much. The silence that followed was excruciating. Elise felt every eye in the room turn toward her, waiting to see how she would respond. Her cheeks burned, old humiliations rising like ghosts. For a moment she was that invisible girl again, the one everyone overlooked and dismissed. Then Edmund stood, and his movement was so sudden, so commanding, that every head swiveled toward him. "You speak of obstacles, Lady Blackwood," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an edge of steel that silenced the room completely. "And you're quite right. There were obstacles to overcome, but not the ones you imagine." He paused, his gaze sweeping the table, ensuring he had everyone's absolute attention. "The obstacle was a society that values beauty over substance, that prizes performance over authenticity, that measures a woman's worth by her appearance rather than her character. That was the obstacle, not my wife's supposed plainness, but the blindness of everyone around her who couldn't see what was obvious to anyone with perception." He turned to look directly at Leonora, his expression hardening. "And you, Lady Leonora, speak of what everyone assumed. You're right again. Everyone assumed I would follow the predictable pattern, choose the most beautiful woman available, regardless of what lay beneath that beauty. Everyone assumed that because your sister spent her life in your shadow, she must be somehow less than you. But here's what everyone failed to understand. I didn't choose Elise, despite her being overlooked. I chose her because I actually looked. I saw her, really saw her. And what I found was a woman of extraordinary depth, intelligence, kindness, and strength." He moved then, walking down the length of the table to where Elise sat. The room held its collective breath as he reached her chair, and with deliberate ceremony, pulled it out slightly, then extended his hand to her. "Stand up, Elise," he said gently. "Let them see you." Elise's heart pounded so hard she thought everyone must hear it. But she placed her hand in Edmund's and rose, facing the room full of London's most influential people, many of whom had doubted her, mocked her, or actively worked against her. Edmund's arm went around her waist, pulling her close to his side. When he spoke again, his voice rang with absolute conviction. "This woman is my choice, not my compromise, not my obligation, not my moment of charitable impulse. My choice. She is the most remarkable person I've ever met, and I consider myself extraordinarily fortunate that she agreed to marry me. She has made me happier than I ever thought possible. She has challenged me, supported me, worked alongside me to build something meaningful. She is brilliant, observant, compassionate, and yes, beautiful, not in the conventional way that society celebrates, but in the ways that actually matter. The beauty of a mind that engages with ideas. The beauty of a heart that cares deeply. The beauty of a spirit that remains kind even when others are cruel." He turned to address Leonora directly, his expression stern. "You spent your entire life trying to diminish your sister, to keep her in shadow so your own light would shine brighter. But what you never understood is that true brightness doesn't need darkness to define it. Elizie's light has always been there. You simply chose not to see it because acknowledging it would have threatened your sense of superiority. Well, look at her now. She's not standing in anyone's shadow. She's standing beside me as my equal and partner. She is the Duchess of Thornbury, mistress of 3 estates, respected by everyone in this room who matters. She has earned every bit of that respect through her own merit, not through beauty or connections, but through genuine worth. He gestured toward the table, his voice rising. So yes, Lady Blackwood, there were obstacles, but we overcame them together, and we will continue to overcome every petty attempt to undermine what we've built, because we are united, we are strong, and we are precisely where we both choose to be. Then, with the entire room watching, he turned to Elise, cupped her face in his hands, and kissed her. It was not the chaste kiss appropriate for public display, but something deeper, more possessive, a claiming that left no doubt about his feelings or intentions. When he finally pulled back, Elise saw tears on his cheeks, matching the ones streaming down her own face. "I love you," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I have always loved you. I will always love you. And anyone who cannot accept that or treat you with the respect you deserve has no place in our lives." The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then Lord Waverley rose from his seat, raising his glass. "To the Duke and Duchess of Thornbury," he said firmly, "a partnership built on genuine affection and mutual respect. May we all be so fortunate." "Hear, hear," chorused several voices, and suddenly the room was rising, glasses lifting, people calling out genuine congratulations and support. Elise looked around through her tears and saw so many faces reflecting approval, admiration, even awe. Lady Waverley was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The French diplomat was smiling broadly. Even some of those who had been skeptical or dismissive looked moved by Edmund's passionate defence. But it was the other faces that truly mattered, the ones reflecting defeat and humiliation. Lady Blackwood had gone pale, her calculated attack turned against her. The Countess looked as though she'd swallowed something bitter, finally forced to confront that she had undervalued her own daughter. Viscount Ashford appeared uncomfortable, perhaps questioning what kind of woman he had agreed to marry. And Leonora. Defeat and humiliation. Lady Blackwood had gone pale, her calculated attack turned against her. The Countess looked as though she'd swallowed something bitter, finally forced to confront that she had undervalued her own daughter. Viscount Ashford appeared uncomfortable, perhaps questioning what kind of woman he had agreed to marry. And Leonora. Her sister sat frozen, her beautiful face crumpling as the reality crashed over her. She had spent her entire life being told she was special, valuable, superior, and she had built her identity on that foundation. But in this moment, watching Elise celebrated and defended with such fierce devotion, that foundation had shattered. For just an instant, Elise felt a flash of pity. Her sister had been as much a victim of society's shallow values as Elise herself, encouraged to develop beauty at the expense of substance, to perform rather than simply be. But the pity was fleeting. Leonora had made her choices, had actively worked to hurt and humiliate her own sister. She deserved whatever consequences followed. "I believe," Edmund said, his voice cutting through the lingering tension, "that it's time for dessert, and perhaps some music afterward. Mrs. Pemberton, if you would." The housekeeper, who had been watching from the doorway, nodded briskly and signalled the servants. The moment broke, conversation resuming as dessert was served. But everything had changed. The line had been drawn, the sides chosen. Those who truly mattered, people of substance and character, had aligned themselves with Elise and Edmund. The others, they no longer mattered. Lady Blackwood and her sister left before dessert was finished, departing without ceremony or excuse. The Countess followed shortly after, her expression stony. She left without saying goodbye to Elise, without acknowledging her at all, a final rejection that Elise found she no longer cared about. Her mother's approval had never truly been available anyway. Leonora remained, perhaps because Viscount Ashford refused to leave such a prestigious gathering early, or perhaps because she was simply too stunned to move. She sat silent and pale through the rest of dinner, her earlier vivacity completely extinguished. When the ladies retired to the drawing room afterward, Elise found herself surrounded by women offering genuine friendship and support. Lady Waverley pulled her aside, linking their arms companionably. "My dear, you've handled yourself with such grace this evening. That speech your husband gave, I don't think there was a dry eye in the room. He loves you desperately." "I know," Elise said softly, the wonder of it still fresh. "I still can't quite believe it sometimes." "Believe it. You've earned it. And more than that, you've proven yourself worthy of the position you occupy. You're going to be a formidable force in society, my dear. I can see it already." As the evening progressed, Elise moved through the rooms of her home with confidence she hadn't known she possessed. She conversed easily with diplomats and nobles, discussed politics and trade with the men when they rejoined the ladies, played the piano when asked, not expertly but competently enough to please. She was, in every way, the Duchess she had become. It was near midnight when she noticed Leonora standing alone near the terrace doors, staring out at the dark garden. Something in her sister's posture, the slump of defeat, the isolation, moved Elise to approach despite everything that had passed between them. "Leonora," she said quietly. Her sister turned, and Elise was shocked to see tears on her perfect face. For a moment, the mask of beauty and superiority had fallen away, revealing someone lost and broken underneath. "You won," Leonora said, her voice hoarse. "You got everything. The Duke, the title, the respect, everything I was supposed to have." "You were never supposed to have it," Elise replied gently. "Edmund was never meant to be yours, Leonora. He wasn't right for you, and you weren't right for him. But Viscount Ashford, he seems genuinely devoted to you. You could have happiness too if you'd let yourself." "How?" Leonora's voice cracked. "How am I supposed to be happy watching you live the life that should have been mine? It was never yours." Elise said it firmly but not unkindly. "That's what you need to understand. This life, this marriage, it was never about you. It was about me and Edmund finding each other. Your jealousy, your attempts to sabotage us, they were never about what you actually wanted. They were about your pride, your need to be the center of attention. But Leonora, you are beautiful. You are charming when you want to be. You could have so much if you just stopped measuring your worth against mine." "I don't know how to do that," Leonora whispered. "I don't know how to be anything other than the beautiful sister. It's all I've ever been." For the first time in her life, Elise truly saw her sister, not as the perfect rival who had everything, but as another woman trapped by society's expectations. Leonora had been praised for her beauty and taught that it was her only value. When that beauty had failed to win her the biggest prize, she had lost her sense of self entirely. "Then learn," Elise said softly. "Discover who you are beyond beauty. You're about to marry a man who seems to genuinely care for you. Let him see the real person underneath. Find interests, pursuits, things that matter to you beyond admiration. It's not too late, Leonora, but you have to choose it. You have to want to be more." Leonora stared at her for a long moment, emotions warring across her face. Anger, grief, perhaps the faintest glimmer of understanding. "I hated you," she said finally. "I hated that he chose you over me, that he saw something in you I couldn't see. I know, but maybe now you can start to let that go." Leonora didn't answer, but something in her expression shifted, not quite acceptance, but perhaps the beginning of it. Viscount Ashford approached then, concern evident in his features, and gently guided Leonora away. As they departed, Leonora looked back once, and Elise saw not hatred in her eyes, but something more complicated, pain, loss, but also maybe the first fragile shoots of release. After the last guests departed, and the house finally grew quiet, Elise and Edmund stood together in the now empty dining room, surveying the aftermath of the evening. "You handled that beautifully," Edmund said, pulling her into his arms. "All of it. The dinner, the confrontation, even your conversation with Leonora at the end. I'm so proud of you." "I couldn't have done it without you," Elise replied, resting her head against his chest. "Everything you said tonight was nothing but truth, every word." He tilted her face up to his. "I meant what I said, Elise. I love you. You are my choice, today and always. I love you too, she whispered. You gave me back myself, Edmund. You showed me I was worth choosing. They stood there in the candlelight, holding each other as the house settled into silence around them. Outside, moonlight streamed through the windows, the same moonlight Elise had whispered her wish to all those months ago. She had wished to be seen, and the universe or fate or simple chance had delivered beyond her wildest imaginings. She had been invisible for so long, living in shadow, believing herself worthless. But Edmund had looked past the performance of society, past the glittering surface that everyone else focused on, and he had seen her, really seen her. And in being seen, she had become more fully herself than she ever thought possible. The Duke of Thornbury had heard a moonlight wish and had chosen to make it reality, not out of pity or charity, but out of recognition. He had recognized in Elise what no one else had bothered to look for: substance, depth, worth. And in doing so, he had given her not just position or title, but something far more precious. He had given her herself. As they finally climbed the stairs to their bedroom, Elise thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The years of invisibility, the cruel comparisons, the constant dismissal, all of it had been necessary to make this happiness so acute, so precious. She had lived in darkness long enough to truly appreciate the light. Tomorrow, London society would buzz with gossip about the dinner, about Edmund's passionate defence, about Lady Blackwood's humiliation and Leonora's defeat. Some would celebrate Elise's triumph, others would find new ways to criticise or undermine her. But it no longer mattered. She knew who she was now. She knew her worth. And she had a partner who would stand beside her against whatever came. In their bedroom, as Edmund helped unfasten her gown, she caught sight of them in the mirror. The Duke and his Duchess, partners in every sense. She saw not the plain girl she had been, but the woman she had become, confident, loved, chosen. "What are you thinking?" Edmund asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "I'm thinking," Elise said slowly, "that sometimes the universe listens to moonlight wishes, and sometimes the answer to those wishes is standing right in front of us, if we're brave enough to accept it." He smiled and kissed her temple. "I'm glad you were brave enough." "So am I," she whispered. "So am I." Thank you so much for listening to Elise and Edmund's story, dear friends. If this tale of love, resilience, and being truly seen touched your heart, we would be so grateful if you'd take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you these romantic journeys that celebrate the strength and beauty found in unexpected places. Please leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Which moment resonated most with you? Was it Elise's moonlight wish, Edmund's fierce defense at the dinner, or perhaps that final confrontation with Leonora? We love hearing from you and building this community together. Don't forget to click that like button and activate notifications so you'll never miss another story from Echoes of Romance. Each story we share celebrates love in all its forms, the kind that sees beyond surfaces, that values substance over sparkle, and that proves we all deserve to be chosen for exactly who we are. Until next time, may you find someone who sees you as clearly as Edmund saw Elise, and may you have the courage to see yourself that way too. Thank you for being part of our community, and we'll see you in the next story.